Hey everybody, welcome back to The House List. I'm your host, Peter Agostin, and thank you for joining me, especially on this Thanksgiving holiday week special, where I decided to drop 2 episodes this week. Earlier in the week, we had a fantastic conversation I recorded at WFMU radio station in Jersey City, New Jersey, with the one and only Billy Jam. And then today's episode is with an incredible writer, journalist, Harvard grad, record label owner, producer, performer, and now chef, Skiz S.H. Fernando Jr. Some people know him as Skiz Fernando. Some people know him as under his performance moniker, Spectre. We go pretty far back in that I've worked with him on a few different levels. Most notably was our time working together on the short-lived, albeit very memorable TV show that was on VH1 called Ego Trip's The White Rapper Show. A challenge, reality, game show-esque program produced by the guys from Ego Trip magazine, and Skiz Fernando and I worked behind the scenes. I actually worked on the show from its inception, at least from the very beginning of pre-production all the way to the very end. If you guys have ever seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. But Skiz and I, when he came on board, we were kind of like the silent runners of the show, driving. He handled the talent, namely the host, MC Search, and I drove the white rapper contestants, white rappers quite literally being the premise of the show, from challenge to challenge. So we talk about that. We talk about the story of his long-running record label, WordSound. Many of you might know that from Prince Paul's Psychoanalysis album and numerous other projects, from Sensational. He did Paul Barman's first record, and a gang of other really cool stuff. Scotty Hard. We talked about his time working with Bill Laswell, a friend of his, and as a Harvard grad, his early works writing on The Source. But and then now his foray into food. He took Anthony Bourdain to Sri Lanka for Anthony's show, No Reservations. So we get into that. We get into a whole bunch of stuff. I myself just walked out in the backyard. It is Thanksgiving today. And regardless of how you may be not celebrating it, ignoring it, I love to cook myself, holiday or not. So, but I'm here in Virginia visiting my dad. I got my girlfriend with me, so just the 3 of us here. So I decided to roast a duck today that we got from a farm here in town. So I got a duck in the oven, and I got to get back to that. You know what I'm saying? And the cranberries just popped. So I got to get back to my cranberry sauce. So without further ado, here on the house list with Peter Agostin, check out my conversation recorded in my living room in Brooklyn with Skiz Fernando, aka S.H. Fernando Jr. right now. Let's go into this. Come on, y'all. That's why I was really interested in talking to you too, in that I know that I first became familiar with you through your writing. Well, first through The Source.
Oh, okay.
Because I'm 30.
Are we starting?
Yeah,
now?
we're
Okay.
starting. Yeah.
Are you gonna edit this at all?
Yeah. I'm gonna edit. I'm gonna kind of fade into it and stuff. But again, since this is still this is in the pilot season, So, but I absolutely are gonna use this. But I will edit it. I have to figure out that getting the nuts and bolts down first and shit, the real content. So yeah, and this isn't anything formal whatsoever, too.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's just really trying to pull stories or anecdotes, and you and I have sort of crossed paths a few times over the years, and it's funny. Really quick, I wanted to bring something out real quick too. because with even with
Wow, you got a copy of the new beats, huh?
yeah, actually I do have a copy of it, which I had you sign. I don't know if you even remember.
yeah.
This was actually on the set of the White Rapper show.
Okay.
And I think I may have asked you to write "Keep It Schmoove" on there. But this, I love this book. But I also found this in my all my storage. Yeah. The
Oh, you got like a beta copy of Booty Clap? That's crazy.
Yeah, Booty Clap.
How'd you get that?
I think you may have given this to me.
Oh, okay.
Because for a while I was doing the Culturama music video.
Exactly.
Music video compilations, and I did. And Jason X was like sort of the bonus after the credits, because obviously it was kind of a rated X style video. Did you make this video?
Yes, we did.
You shot it?
Yep.
Because it's pretty amazing too. I'm holding.
We shot it on film too, on 16 millimeter film.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah.
All in one day at this place called Tukey's in downtown Manhattan.
Wow.
Tukey Smith was Bob De Niro's girlfriend, who owned a bar.
Wow.
Called Tukey's, and a friend of mine who happens to be in town, all friend of mine from the music days, this guy Sasan, used to be the manager there.
Oh,
so
shit.
they closed down the bar, and in like the last couple days before they closed it down, we snuck in there and shot the video because it wasn't being used, and we got real strippers from Philly to come up and work for free.
It definitely looked authentic.
This is way before all the twerking and stuff broke, you know?
No, because this was what, 90?
This is like 96.
Yeah.
And as you can see, there's booty all up in that video.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just bouncing booties.
And you had it was a real club scene too, because it was the bouncers outside, there was a line. Yeah, because I remember trying to think. And it was Prince Paul, and I think Sensational might have been in there too.
all the WordSound characters were in there.
Right.
Sensational, Mr. Dead was in it.
Right. So yeah, actually maybe that would be a good thing to sort of talk about first, because I definitely have known of the label for a long time, but looking even like before you came over, kind of going back to the history of it too. I mean, it's your first record was like in the early '90s, right, with WordSound.
Yeah. You want me to talk a little about how the label started?
Yeah, because obviously you had other stuff going on at the same time. I mean, you were writing around the same period of time too, right?
I'm one of those characters who, when I'm into something, I get into it from all angles.
Yeah.
So, as far as the music industry is concerned, I started off as a journalist for The Source, as you said. And then I was also dabbling in making my own music at the time.
Right.
And at a certain point, the writing and the music production kind of crossed over, because I was, I was making music, and then I was writing about the hip hop scene that was just blowing up in New York in the early '90s. That was really the first time that hip hop became mainstream, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously there's been different times during the course of hip hop, like '79 when Rapper's Delight came out. That was like the first time it peaked out of the underground. But the '90s was an amazing time to be in New York, and New York was all about hip hop back then. It's just like all these groups were coming up from different areas of New York. You had it was just an incredible creative time. And
where were you living then?
I was living I came to New York to go to school. I came to New York to go to Columbia for journalism school, which is a year-long program. And when I came to New York, I actually had in mind to write a book about hip hop. That was one of the main reasons for coming to New York, because I had gone to school in Boston. I went to Harvard, and then after graduation, I went to Greece for a year and taught at a school.
Wow.
And then, I was kind of formulating my ideas of what I wanted to do next. And New York, I was just so into hip hop that New York was the magnet. I had to be in New York. So
of course, yeah.
To justify it to my parents, to my mom, I went to graduate school at Columbia.
Right.
So I got the legitimate end covered. And while I was at Columbia, I was just immersing myself in the hip hop scene. I was just any type of school assignment they gave me, I kind of related it to hip hop. And then you have to do a master's thesis before you graduate from Columbia. So I did my master's thesis on the connection between rap and reggae. Yeah.
There's a
whole and that became a chapter in my book. It's called Rap's Ragamuffin Roots.
Right.
Because going back a bit, in college I was heavily into radio. I used to do the radio station
in Harvard
Radio, WHRB 95.3.
Nice.
I used to do the dub frequency every Saturday from 1 to 5 p.m.
Okay.
The best in roots, rock, ragamuffin.
Nice.
And we played all types of reggae, but specifically dub. So that's the other end of my personality.
Right.
Dub,
which for
dub spectrum.
Absolutely. And in WordSound, if people are familiar with the label and the catalog, that is definitely a heavy
dub
theme.
and hip hop are like the twin pillars of WordSound. So where was I? Yeah. So I came to New York wanting to do this book. Through Columbia, through all my assignments was from Columbia, I was actually able to work on the book. And not only that, they had a class there the second semester called the Book Workshop, which basically, during the course of that workshop, you generate a book proposal, and that's exactly what I did. I wrote a proposal for the new beats, and about 4 months after I graduated, I actually got a book deal from Anchor Doubleday, one of the biggest publishing companies out there, and this was like '93. And it was like a dream, to get paid. I mean, I didn't make a lot of money, but I got to advance to write a book on something that I loved.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And so I just immersed myself in the whole scene. I got to know so many artists. I was hanging out with the artists. I was hanging out in the studio, going to studio sessions. Like I went on tour with EPMD and the Hit Squad.
Yeah, which is by far that's my favorite chapter in the book. And that's what
cool.
I went. I go back to that.
That was like fly on the wall type.
Right.
On a rap tour. And that was the first time I had ever been on tour before. Before I performed my music myself. So that was very educational for me.
So were you freelancing too at this point? Or?
I was pretty much just for the source.
Right.
Because going back a little bit too, Harvard,
Sure.
Two of my classmates were John Schechter and Dave Mays, who were the two guys who started the Source.
Right. The creators of the Source.
Yeah, they started the Source while they were at Harvard.
Right, that's right.
And they had a very successful radio show that was on right after mine called Street Beat. And somehow they were just so connected. They used to have that's where I first met Guru from Gangstar when he was still living in Boston.
Wow.
It was like I forget what they were called back then. Maybe it was still Gangstar.
Or was he just Keith E?
Keith E. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And Almighty RSO was in
right.
the mix.
The infamous RSO, who of course have a long history with the Source too.
But give thanks to John Schechter because he gave me my first writing assignment.
So did you write for the Source when it was in Harvard?
No. Only after they moved to New York. We graduated in '90, and then they moved to New York, set up the Source, and then when I came back from Greece to go to school at Columbia, then I linked up with them again, and I started writing for the Source. And then, at the time there were all these other underground hip hop publications popping up. So I just started writing for all these, and you got to understand, this is like a new form of journalism at the time too, hip hop journalism. There's very few people who could really write about it, with that inside view.
Right. And New York was absolutely in the center of that.
New York was the nexus of it at that time. This is like, it was still going on in other places. LA had a scene for sure. And I covered that in the book too. I went out to LA and I talked to Dr. Dre and
Jerry Heller, I saw
Cypress Hill, all these groups who were doing stuff out there. But the new beats to me really kind of documents that 90s scene when hip-hop was basically just moving out of the underground into the mainstream. And I thought the book did pretty well, but one of my professors at Columbia said, "Man, if your book had come out like 5 years later, it would have probably been a bestseller." Because like so many more people were into hip hop and everything.
Yeah, it's definitely was a bit ahead of its time, and I remember even the ads in the source, because there were ads for it, because it was so because there's that image of one of the dudes from Das Effects that was like part of the, I don't know if you recall the sort of the half-page ads or whatever they were, and it was, I don't remember, besides like maybe Rap Attack, David Toop's thing, like there weren't.
That was from the 80s.
Yeah, which is a totally different style of writing, different, and he was British too, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So this was like this new, it was edgy kind of thing, but it was still like years from this kind of influx of many other books. Now there's, countless hip hop books, but it was, especially with that kind of sort of raw style of journalism too. It was,
I'm proud to say that it was all original research because as you said, there were only, when I wrote the New Beats, there was only Stephen Hagar's book, which is my all-time favorite book.
Which is
the Illustrated History of Hip Hop, Rap, and Breakdancing. Steve Hagar. That was the first book on hip hop that ever came out. And then David Toop's Rap Attack was a huge influence too. But the New Beats was like the first to cover the 90s, which was like a whole new era for hip hop, and yeah, it was just I feel privileged to even have been alive during that time and just to have been there, because that was such a formative time for the whole culture. I always see hip hop as a culture. I don't, the rap industry is something totally different, but hip hop culture is still alive. People don't realize it. People think it's just about rap, but that's what always drew me towards hip hop. It was because having grown up with it, and people are always dismissing it as a fad, and I knew that it was so much deeper than that. So.
Could you speak on that chapter with the Hit Squad too? Because just because it's such an entertaining read, if you're like a fan of that sort of narrative style, fly on the wall sense of journalism, but it also, you kind of caught those guys at their like sort of commercial peak. And then like there's an afterword after that chapter. I don't know if you remember where
I sure do.
It was like and I didn't even realize this until reading it just recently, rereading it rather, where it's like I didn't, there's that, infamous story of how Paris Smith was set up and robbed. I didn't realize that was before they went on tour, and there was some kind of sense that maybe he didn't tell everyone else, and for the sake of the team or the business, they continued with the tour, even though there's this kind of notorious story.
There was like basically, there was a PR agency back in the day called Set to Run, and they used to be the publicist for a lot of the New York rappers at the time. And my friend, I was friends with all the people up at Set to Run, and especially this girl Devin Roberson, who you might know. She's since passed away. Rest in peace, Devin. But Devin was my hookup to all these rappers, and personally, EPMD was one of my favorite groups coming up in college. Strictly business.
Right.
What else can you say? That to me at their time, their production was so far ahead. Eric Sermon's production was just like some space age funk.
It was incredible.
They had the whole hit. Then they had the whole Hit Squad, which was Das Effects. They brought Redman into the game, K Solo. Keith Murray, and when I found out that they were doing this big Hit Squad tour, I basically straight up asked Parrish Smith. I said, "Yo, I'm doing this book, about hip hop, and I'd like to use you guys as a case study, just to, because basically at the time that's how new groups came into the music industry, through established groups."
Right.
And the Hit Squad was almost like a template for that, because you had EPMD, who is well respected, and then they're bringing these other groups like Das Effects. Then Das Effects goes platinum, Then they bring in Redman.
Right.
So obviously they had good taste, right? Because these guys are still around today.
Right.
Redman, Das Effect. So I back in those days, it was just easy to approach rappers. They weren't surrounded by a whole phalanx of publicists and all this stuff. So I was interviewing Parrish at Set to Run one day. I said, I'd like to go on tour with you guys. And he was like, sure.
Wow.
It was just like easy as that. So I went on tour for like a week. It was just basically New York, upstate, and it was like
the kickoff to their national tour,
to
right?
the national tour, yeah. And actually, I don't want to talk too much more about it because I have, I talk a lot about that in my own book. I have a book coming out.
Oh, all right,
yeah,
perfect.
I have a new book coming out. I just finished it.
Oh man, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a memoir.
Tell me about it.
It's a memoir, and it's called Gen Next.
Cool.
And it's basically about, the trials and tribulations of a creative trying to make it in society. Like you said, I've been, not only do I write, but I make music, I make films, I cook. I'm into a lot of different creative stuff.
Right.
And that's how I've basically tried to make it in life. I've never really had like a job.
Right.
I basically pretty much work for myself. And people think it's a glamorous life, but it's hard.
It's very hard.
It's very hard to make it, and
every day is a little different than the next. A different level, stress level, and the projects come and go. There's many peaks and valleys. So yeah, I know that very well. So I'm
kind of doing this for all creative people like myself, who everyone thinks, oh, they're living a great lifestyle. They don't have to work. But really, when you work for yourself, you work 10 times as hard as anyone else is working.
Absolutely.
And people who work for themselves know that. So
there's no doubt about it. So you're actually expanding on that story in the book.
Yeah. I have a lot of vignettes.
Cool.
From the vaults from pretty much everything I've done. So.
Oh, that's awesome, man.
But yeah.
So you were mentioning too, just like kind of before we jumped into that, like and I'd love to talk about this just a little bit, is just those early times writing for The Source and writing for whatever that kind of first wave of New York kind of publications, whether, because there's a lot of smaller ones under The Source too.
Right.
And there's a stable of writers that are still working to this day that really kind of got their chops up from that time. Chairman Mao and Dave Tompkins and, Elliott Smith, Elliott Wilson. And just what was that first, do you remember what your first piece was for The Source?
I do. It was actually a piece on this English group, a live band called the Brand New Heavies.
Ah, yeah.
And they were kind of, at the time there was this kind of retro funk movement going on. You had...
this has got to be like, what, 92 or 91?
Yeah, early 91, 92, you had like Soul Kitchen going on, like...
The Goats, I think that was maybe something like that too.
That was a band, right?
Right,
yeah.
Yeah.
But there was this retro funk phase going on where people were like... interested in what people were sampling in the rap tunes,
right,
and then they would just have these club nights where they just played all those original oldies that people sample from, So basically, the Brand New Heavies were doing this live. They were playing like live funk things, and then they did an album called the Heavy Rhyme Experience where they collaborated with all these New York rappers, Guru, Master Ace, Grand Poobah, I think Kool Keith might have been in that, if I'm not mistaken.
G-Rap, I think.
G-Rap, yeah. So
there's a lot, yeah.
So, funny enough, they shot the video for this at this abandoned warehouse in Williamsburg.
Right.
And this is when Williamsburg was very scary, believe it or not. I think it's actually scarier now with all the...
I think it's very debatable.
All the she stuff going on there now, but back in the day, it was a different kind of scary. It was a kind of like, all these like fiends and.
Well, and Kent Avenue was totally desolate, you know.
It was pretty bad, but the Heavy shot this music video in this warehouse on North 11th and Berry, I remember, and that's the first time I had been out to Williamsburg, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool out here, because it's like, you know, before that I was living uptown in East Harlem, and it was just too hectic, you know. There's just like, that was my first experience with New York, and you know, our apartment was robbed up there.
Wow.
There's crack dealers on the corner. You know, it's not an environment that you really want to live in. So when I saw Williamsburg, it was like, wow, these old abandoned factories, a lot of space, not too many people around on the streets. And after that Brand New Heavies video, I actually ended up living in Williamsburg, like right across the street from where I shot that video. Yeah. So that's kind of funny, but yeah, that was my first. Like, I used to a lot of stuff that I used to pitch for the Source. They had a column called Hip Hop Alternatives.
Right.
Because I've always been hip hop and then some.
Right.
You know, I grew up with hip hop and I love hip hop, and I've always been into other type of music. You know, all throughout my life. You know, I went through my heavy metal phase, my disco phase, my punk phase. Right. I've pretty much been into any type of music. So I was always my angle for the Source and other hip hop magazines was kind of to write about stuff that was on the periphery of hip hop, which was basically where I was, you know, in my own production, and then later on, subsequently with WordSound.
Right.
WordSound was not a hip hop label, but it was hip hop related, and it was kind of on the peripheries of hip hop. And I think the funny thing is, like, we were never accepted by the mainstream or even by the New York hip hop scene. But now the stuff that we were doing like 20, 25 years ago is now kind of mainstream. Right. You know, like, people take these crazy shit, like stuff that Kanye does.
Right, yeah.
You know, it's like these crazy beats and, you know, electronic stuff, and it's kind of good to see now that
it's interesting how
evolved into that direction. But you know, when we were trying to do this 20 years ago, no one was trying to hear it at all. You know, it's like at the same time you had labels in England like Mo Wax and stuff like that, you know, trip hop, who were kind of trying to take it in that direction. But you know, this was in the 90s when the New York hip hop was at its peak. So that was ruling.
Right.
You know, so you couldn't really.
But then you got, I mean, you worked with, like, for WordSound, you worked way out of just that conventional sphere of hip hop, obviously. I mean, even like with Bill Laswell, you've done a lot of stuff with him, right?
Right.
Like, like,
to this day, Bill is one of my best buddies.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm going. In fact, I'm going to see him right after.
Oh, no way, yeah? Oh, cool.
I always see him every time I'm in New York.
How did you guys hook up? Because he was an early Williamsburg, Greenpoint guy, if I'm not mistaken, too. Like,
actually, you know. Bill, that was another guy that I wrote about in the Source.
Oh, nice. Yeah. In that, like, alternatives.
In the hip-hop alternatives column. I pretty much own that column.
Right.
So I heard this album that Bill was doing, I think it was like 92, 93. He has this group called Material.
Oh, I'm not hip to them.
And it's not really a group. It's you could call it a super group, because the thing I liked about Bill Laswell was he didn't just, you know, I was into like sampling weird records that no one even in the hip hop scene had heard of, because everyone was into like the same old stuff, funk and soul, and like pretty much sampling black music or like some, you know, funky rock, white rock from the 70s, stuff like that. I was sampling like crazy stuff, like sound effects records, and, you know, just like bizarre stuff, and a lot of world music, what we would call world music, like sitars and tabla and stuff like that. And then when I found out about Bill, he wasn't sampling that stuff. He was using musicians who played that stuff. You know, he had this concept of this thing called collision music, which was basically a fusion of completely different styles of music and putting them kind of into the same palette. And I kind of saw what I was doing is same thing, but I was sampling it. You know, he was using the real musicians, and he was using the top musicians of any genre. So this group Material had like Bootsy Collins playing bass, you know, Pharoah Sanders playing sax.
Wow.
Zakir Hussain playing tablas. You know, he was like the world's, you know, not Zakir Hussain. Zakir Hussain plays a stringed instrument. Who was that? Anyway, he worked with the best musicians of any genre, and I first heard this record called Hallucination Engine by Material. And it had a very strong hip-hop influence and a very strong world music influence. And that was the first time I had heard that juxtaposition of someone suddenly, you know, now it's very common to use Arabic music or stuff like that, but that was the first time I had heard someone juxtaposing Arabic music and hip-hop beats and dub bass lines. So I was like, I got to meet this guy. I didn't really know much about him, but then when I did a little research, I found out this is the guy who produced Herbie Hancock Rocket in 1983, which was like, that was my breakdancing anthem back in the day when I was like in whatever, junior high.
Right.
So, and that song won a Grammy, you know?
It did, yeah.
That was a very seminal track in a lot of ways.
Oh, huge.
I actually wrote an article about that track many years later for Medium, you know, that website. But think about it. Here's a guy, Herbie Hancock, old school jazz cat. He's kind of had his day. And then he links up with this unknown producer, Bill Laswell, and they make this track, Rocket, which is the first track to have scratching on it.
Right.
In a musical way. It was not just like a little scratch and cut, but there's like scratch solos in it.
Right,
you
throughout the song.
Grand Mixer DST.
Right.
Old school Zulu Nation DJ.
Yeah.
So this was like this was like connecting the dots.
And it's also a completely groundbreaking music video, too.
Oh, you know. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Right.
Yeah, because apparently that was the first time, like, you don't even see Herbie Hancock in the video except on a TV at the end.
Right.
And that was a time that MTV was not playing black artists. Like Michael Jackson was having trouble getting in.
Right.
But I think that year, which was 84, that won a Grammy. Rocket won a Grammy, and then I think it almost won as many MTV awards as Thriller or something like that.
Right.
You know, so yeah, it was a very seminal track. So when I heard Material, Hallucination Engine, I was looking on the back cover of the album, and it said, produced at Greenpoint Studios.
Right.
And I'm living in Williamsburg at the time, and I'm telling my friend, Greenpoint, isn't that just like up the road? And he said, yeah. So I found out later that Greenpoint was like 5-minute walk from my house.
Right.
So I was like, I have to interview this guy Bill Laswell.
Right.
He's been involved in too much shit. So under the aegis of writing a review for The Source under this Hip Hop Alternatives, I set up an interview with Laswell, which was easy enough, you know. Axiom was his label, which was through Island. So I met Laswell at his place. He lived on Park Avenue at the time. And I walk into his living room, and honestly, it's 4 walls, floor to ceiling, of just records.
Wow.
And I was just like, whoa. I mean, this guy had more records than most people I had ever seen, except Africa Bambaataa. Like, I'd been to Bambaata's place in Bronx River, and there's records in the bathroom. There's stacks in the bathroom, in the kitchen, and he said that was only one of several places where he kept records.
Wow.
But yeah, so Bill had all of these records. And
so was he inviting as far as like an interview? You guys obviously must have hit it off.
We hit it off, yeah, because first it was a regular interview. I was asking questions, but then when I found out that he had all these connections to other stuff, you know, he had worked at a label called Celluloid, which was kind of like a seminal hip hop label. Put out a lot of early.
Change the Beat, Fab Five
Yep,
Freddy was
exactly.
on there. Right.
Change the Beat, K-Bop and Fab Five Freddy.
Right.
And Change the Beat, has that fresh sample, which is the most sampled record in all of hip hop.
Right.
That's another little tidbit there.
Yeah.
So Bill and I just naturally hit it off because, we were talking about not just hip hop, we were talking about all the other stuff he was into. Make a long story short, I became friends with him because the studio was just 5 minutes from my house. I used to spend most of my days there because every day he would have different musicians coming in and recording stuff. And I got to say, through Bill, I met a ton of people. I met a ton of my people who were legendary to me. Like I remember one of the first people I met was Africa Baby Bam from the Jungle Brothers. And the Jungle Brothers, again, was like another one of my favorite hip-hop groups. Their first album, Straight Out the Jungle, was just like a street classic. And then their second album, done by the Forces of Nature. What the hell was that?
Yeah.
That was just like, to me, that is the beginning of the native tongue thing, because they were totally on some Pan-African shit, some hippy-dippy, peace, love, tribe vibes, beads on a string, Africanism. Just, they were coming at hip-hop from a whole crazy direction that had never been.
Yeah, but it was still like funk-oriented too.
It was still hard too.
Right.
It was playful, but it was still hard. So Africa Baby Bam, I met him, and we became friends, and that's how I met Torture, who you know as Sensational.
Right.
When I first met him, he was the fourth Jungle Brother, and
so this is already like while they're into their third album era, right? Or Sensational wasn't. I don't know if he
was the album after Done by the Forces of Nature was called JB's with the Remedy,
right?
And there was a lot of shit around that album,
right?
Because
it's a confusing release, I feel like.
Yeah, the real album never came out because basically it was so experimental.
Really?
And it's since come out. Like back in the day, I put out 4 tracks on a 10-inch, and it was called Crazy Wisdom Master. I had a vinyl only label back then called Black Hoods.
Yes, I see the hat.
Yeah,
I remember
Black Hoods Medina, which is a nickname for Brooklyn back in the day, because in the Nation of Islam, you have Mecca and Medina, the holy cities. So Brooklyn was called Medina, and the Black Hood. Well, we don't have to get into that, but the Black Hood's logo is also like the black spade.
It is, yeah.
From the Street Gang, so there's a lot of science in that too.
There is, yeah.
But
a lot of New York imagery.
What was I saying?
So you're talking about, basically this is like your introduction to Sensational too.
Oh yeah.
Who played a big role in WordSound too.
So, okay, so I had met Sensational a couple times. I met him at Green Street Studios,
right,
where my man Scotty Hard was an engineer, and that was another big hip hop studio, like LL Cool J, PE, all these
Pete Rock and Seal Smooth, I think.
All these groups used to record at Green Street in Soho. And I met, one day I was visiting Scotty Hard. He was working on the Jungle Brothers, and there's this kid there, and he comes up to me and he goes, "Got any weed?" And he was just like this really kind of odd character, How many people do you meet for the first time and they ask you if you have weed? So I was like, all right, this guy's kind of weird. Then I met him at Laswell's studio when the JBs were doing a session there, and he asked me the same thing. And then Bill put out a compilation, and this Torture had a track on it, and it was just like the most dusted hip hop track I'd ever heard. It was just like, it was all offbeat, the vocals were really badly recorded. And I found out subsequently that he had recorded the vocals through a pair of headphones.
So, there you go.
And it was just, pardon my French, fucked up.
Right.
But I loved it.
Right.
I was like, I liked anything that went against the grain, because, and I think at that time in hip hop, that's what hip hop was all about too. biting was a bad word back then. You didn't want to sound like everyone else.
Right.
You know, you wanted to create your own sound and your own identity. And that's why that era of the late 80s and early 90s is still called the golden era, because everyone was so different and everyone was adding on their own elements to hip hop. We had this template called hip hop, and instead of trying to copy it wholehearted, you know, and instead of trying to emulate it, people were just adding on to it.
Right.
You know, and that's, to me, that's what it was about. Now it's just like, good God, what happened, man? It's like,
it's hard to say exactly how to pinpoint that, but yeah, the individuality no longer seems like as much of a prize as it once was.
Yeah,
you know, like,
and certain things are not prized. Like lyricism was always a huge quality in hip hop. You know, it's not. You got respect for the words you use and the concepts that you put out there. You know, but now, like, you got this mumble rap stuff where people don't even know what you're saying.
Right.
You know, it's like, and to be honest, Sensational was doing mumble rap 20 years ago.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, somehow, you know, me and this crazy guy Torture hit it off. And one day I invited him over to my crib in Williamsburg. I had this 2,000 square foot loft I was living in.
Wow.
For like $1,000 a month.
Amazing.
And I invited Torture over. This is before he was Sensational. And I just had this beat playing. And once again, as soon as he walks in, he kind of, his ears prick up. And he didn't even say hi to me. He says, "Yo, hook up the microphone." So that was the beginning of our collaboration. And after that, he used to come over practically every day, and we used to make beats. And it was kind of good for me because I was just learning the equipment back then.
Right. So when is this? This is still like early 90s, right?
Yeah. This is even maybe before the first WordSound came out.
So at what point did you start dabbling in production? Because, I mean, obviously as Spectre and as some of the other projects you've done, I mean, you've been like super prolific as a producer, which, you know, people may not know if they're only familiar with you as a writer or your books and stuff like that. So, I mean, can you talk to us a little bit on how that fell into place?
Yeah, well, I've been dabbling with production since probably college.
Okay.
But basically the first time that I got equipment myself was when I moved to New York.
And how did you even seek that out? Did you just
I've always been a DJ.
Right. Okay. Right.
In
college radio.
College radio. So it's to me it's a natural progression. First we were doing radio, right? Then we used to, whenever there was a reggae show in town, if it was at a big club, the club would get us to open up the show, spinning tunes.
Nice. In Boston.
Right. Then, you get tired of playing other people's music.
Right.
And then you want to kind of make your own music. That's like the next organic step. So you buy a drum machine. You figure out how to use it, And I was lucky because I picked up an SP12, like one of the first generation SP12s. From a guy. I got it used. And that was my first experience with production myself. Then I got, the next piece of equipment I got was a Akai 950, which was the big sampler back then.
Right.
And, I had people like Prince Paul teaching me how to use that thing.
Incredible.
Giving me tips. Like, he showed me like how to sample something and then filter it out so it sounds completely different.
Right.
And he's a genius at that,
Absolutely.
A guy like Prince Paul can take a recognizable loop and chop it up and make it totally unrecognizable. And that's where the creativity comes in hip hop.
Absolutely.
You just don't sample like, a known hit and just loop it and then throw some lyrics over it. It's like back then people were very creative with what they did. And they actually wanted to sound different from other people. And that's how that's how the whole genre, how the whole art form expanded and grew, because, when everyone's doing the same thing, I don't see how anything can grow.
Right.
It's just like, and it happens in everything. Things kind of plateau out. But at that time, people were trying different stuff. And that's why I always thought that WordSound had a place in hip hop, even though we weren't accepted, because that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to push the envelope to the next level too. We didn't know what we were doing really, but we just didn't want to sound like the crowd. Then it became like a quest for equipment at the time. Instead of paying money to go work at a studio and pay an engineer and stuff like that, it was more about, let me be the engineer now and let me learn how to use all this equipment. So it was all very organic, and everything was really self-taught or taught by people I know, like Prince Paul, Scotty Hard. You learn from other musicians, you learn from other people, and you're constantly, any money I got, I would buy a new piece of equipment, and that's how I slowly built up my home studio. And then, working with other artists like Sensational, sometimes I would just be his engineer, and he has some really crazy ideas, and sometimes it doesn't even make sense when you're putting together a track. Like, he'll say sample this, sample, but then when the whole thing comes together, it's like, wow, this kid. So I learned from people like that too. It's like, this guy had no experience making music, but he had an intuitive sense of how different sounds are put together and layered. And I always call him like the Lee Perry of hip hop, because he was so.
It's not bad.
He's so unorthodox in what he does. Like, one day he came over to my house. He used to carry this little portable cassette thing, and he had sampled the sound of the subway doors closing. Ding dong. Right. And one day he said, yo, sample this. And he actually played it, and we sampled it into a microphone. It's extra dirty. Right. And that sound of the subway doors closing became like a hook in the song that we did. So it's like, that's what I love about production. There's no rules to it, and the sky is the limit. You don't have to sample old funk or soul. You have a whole world of sound. You don't even have to sample music. Right. You have a whole world of sound you can sample. And I used to have a portable DAT player at the time. Nice. And I used to do crazy ambient recordings. Oh, yeah. And sometimes I would just play that throughout the whole track. So there's almost like this chaos going on under the track. Right. Even though hip hop is that regular kind of beat, then you have this chaos going. Yeah. And that's another thing that I learned from like RZA. Because I actually wrote the bio for Wu-Tang before they even came out. Not for Wu-Tang, for Protect Your Neck. Wow. Yeah. Because I'm a journalist at this time. I'm writing for all these magazines, and then I'm also doing bios for labels at the time. And
so for the single of Protect Your Neck, for Wu-Tang Records.
The 12-inch that came out, I don't know how they got my name, but RZA called me up and he said, yo, you want to write the bio? You want to write the press release for Protect Your Neck? Right. And I said, sure. I like the song. And then, that was the first time I interviewed RZA, and I was really struck by how smart this guy was. He sounded total hood, total ghetto. He had a fucked up voice and like, yo. But what he was talking about and his concepts, it was just far beyond anyone I had even met, And we're also like the same age. So that was the first time I met RZA. And then just over the years, we became friends, and I ended up, every magazine would contact me because they knew that I knew him.
You were the dude.
So I was the guy. If you wanted a Wu-Tang piece, I was the guy.
Yeah, and you ended up doing, you did a 33 1/3 on.
I never did that.
Oh, I see. I saw it, and I'm like, well, it's not available, so I wonder what.
I never did that.
So what's the story with that?
With that particular 33?
Yeah,
well, I just never got, it's tracking down Wu-Tang is just next to impossible
right
now. They're all spread all over the place.
Right.
It was just logistically, it was very difficult doing it. But what I was going to say was hanging out with RZA and interviewing him and being in the studio with him, I learned so much. And sometimes when I was with him, we used to go to Sam Ash, like just to shopping, and he showed like
for gear.
Right. And that's like why I bought the Nord lead keyboard, because that's like what RZA used on, I think it was like Liquid Swords. He used so I used to get a lot of tips from producers, Prince Paul, in that way. So I was kind of masquerading as a journalist at the time, and just like taking notes, like which I use for myself. I don't know where I was going with that. But
yeah, just talking about your own production work too. Obviously, that's the running. It seemed like the journalism, the writing, and recording were sort of running in tandem with one another. Right?
Everything was concurrent.
Right.
It was just all out music. I was, like I said, I approached something from all angles. So I'm writing about music. I'm making music. I'm pretty much everywhere.
Right.
360 on this music thing, on this hip hop thing.
Hell yeah.
And luckily at the time, you could actually make a living out of it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, after my book came out, then it was a whole nother level, because then I had publications like Rolling Stone and the New York Times approaching me to write.
Right.
And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So I never turned down any work. I always write, and
you were able to support yourself with the writing back then too.
Yeah.
I'm sure, right?
And it's kind of incredible when you think about it, because when 2016, to live in New York City, man, it takes a lot of resources.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of hustle. Like if you're, the cost of living is a lot higher now than it was. Because as I said, I was paying $1,000 a month rent, and my whole life was music, and like any money I earned went back into the label.
Right.
I wasn't even, but it's not like I was making a lot of money, but I was living such a good quality of life back then on nothing, and it's kind of surprising,
Because you live in Baltimore now, right?
Yeah. In 2000, I moved down to Bmore, where I grew up.
Oh, okay, cool.
And that was actually a good move for me, because I could see the writing on the wall as far as New York, what was happening, the gentrification. I had been priced out of so many neighborhoods, and finally I was in. The last place I lived in New York was Bed-Stuy, and I got priced out of Bed-Stuy.
In 2000?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The last place I lived on Gates Avenue, I think I was paying like $1,800 a month, which was a lot for me, for one person to come up with every month.
No question.
That's probably peanuts now compared to,
Yeah.
But also I could just see that, just look at the change in Williamsburg, like now it's like almost like Soho, but back in the day it was dangerous, it was scary, but yet I liked it so much because there was so much opportunity back then.
Right.
Like we used to throw parties in these abandoned warehouses, bring in a generator,
right,
and just set up and just throw free parties, like.
Mm-hmm. As WordSound, you do stuff for WordSound stuff, or just as
not
Spectre?
As WordSound. There was one of my friends, Doc Israel, who's a WordSound artist.
Of course.
He and we used to work out of his studio in Williamsburg. He had a studio called Basemind. I think now he's in Bushwick.
Gotcha.
And he still might have a studio there, but that was Doc used to throw early parties down by those abandoned warehouses on the waterfront.
Right.
It was a very cool scene back in the day. It was a much more open scene. It was all artists. I remember in Williamsburg there used to be this building called the Old Dutch Mustard Factory, and people used to set up crazy installations.
Right.
So.
Well, let's see. I would love to talk just a little bit about psychoanalysis, just if we can, because I feel like that was the one,
that
big
broke
break.
Through. Yeah.
Yeah, and even though it was in the middle of the timeline really for WordSound, but I mean it was also, you kind of gave it was like a rebirthing of Prince Paul too. I feel like
for
too.
For sure.
And I even remember some articles back then too of him where he was at a certain place in his life, post De La and like during Gravediggers, and it was like this great thing. And if you can recall too, I mean, even with my now defunct label, we ended up doing a record several years later called It's Trumental, which on Female Fun, which isn't the same, but it's another kind of stab at like an instrumental sort of album. But nothing can really like compare to when and the music that made up Psychoanalysis, because it was just really, it touched a nerve. It was like kind of there was a lot of taboo subject matter on it, but it was also just dark and depressing, and but like so rich with samples. And what was that?
Humor.
Yeah, it's just a dark sense of humor. And
I had met Prince Paul while I was working on the New Beats.
Right, there's he has a chapter in that.
He was one of the cooler people that I interviewed. I must have interviewed at least 100 rappers for that book, but he's one guy who stuck out because, for one, his personality is more kind of quirky and nerdy. Right. He's not trying to put on a front. He's not trying to be the tough guy, or he's not trying to be Mr. Streetwise.
Right.
He is what he is. He's a kid from suburban Long Island, middle class kid who went to college.
Right.
Who just happens to love hip hop and music, and I could really relate to Paul. Yeah, and I think he's only a couple years older than me. So when I was doing the New Beats, I told Paul, I'm going to start a label one day, and I'd like you to do a record. Because I remember in college, man, that first De La Soul was just,
of course,
just mind blowing. And I appreciated that kind of strain of hip hop, just like I said about the Jungle Brothers, the Native Tongues. Excuse me, the Native Tongues brought such a positivity and a vibrance to hip hop at the time, and they really changed the focus of hip hop in a way, and I really appreciated that. And so Paul, when I asked him, to do a record, he was down. He said, "Let me know when you're ready." So a couple years later, I said, "Paul, remember when we first met? I was talking about my label. I said, I got my label now, and I want you to do a record." And at the time, like you said, he was kind of going a little down in the industry. He had a couple, misfires, if you want to call it that, and his stock was not on the rise. So he was working on a group called Gravediggers with RZA and Fruquan, and that was kind of going to be his comeback, in the industry. And he was really kind of frustrated and disillusioned and disappointed with the industry side of things, how he had been treated by the record industry. So here's me coming in, and I'm like, "Paul, give me a record, do anything you want, just get creative with it." And it kind of threw him for a loop for a minute, because he was so used to record company people saying, "Oh, we need hits, we need something like this, or we need a song like this, we need like some radio play." And here I am, and I'm saying, just do whatever you want. It's like you're the man who introduced the skits to hip hop, man.
Right.
That's one of my favorite things about your production. So Psychoanalysis is almost an album of skits and instrumentals and humor. I don't think, maybe today in these PC days it might not fly, because there's songs
go back to some of
"It's
those.
a Beautiful Night for a Date Rape."
Right.
It's Paul's sense of humor. It's like, but I don't think maybe people today might understand it like that. People might get a little touchy about it. But here's a guy who, his first, obviously he was with Stetsa as just a DJ, but his first album as a producer goes platinum, and then he's vaulted to these heights, and then he's almost thrown out.
Right.
So, that also put that in my mind that, this music thing is not stable.
No.
It's not going to last, So when you're in it, be in it fully and do whatever you can now. Because I know once you take one step away from it, the whole thing is going to change. And that's usually what happens, It's
Right.
like you can't, it's very rare for artists to have longevity in a career.
Absolutely.
Or consistency, because the whole scene is so fickle.
Right.
People get tired of stuff. The new things come up. So.
Well, you guys put out an incredible thing. I mean, if people haven't even, if you're listening to this and you haven't had a chance to hear it, it's definitely like an archive of a certain period of time. Exactly. In an artist's career and in the music landscape as a whole too. I mean,
I tend to listen to. I try to listen to what's happening today, but inevitably I gravitate towards older music.
Yeah, likewise.
Even today, it's like, and that's one of the reasons I started making music myself was I wasn't hearing something.
Right.
So that's why I made music to like, this is something else, and my own music is Spectre is like that because there's no reason that I should be making music now. Like I don't. You can't sell your music now. It's like it's almost a given that you're supposed to give stuff away for free as an artist.
Yeah.
And that's not fair for us as artists. Like
no, it's a raw deal.
We
for sure.
can't make a like everyone else. Plumbers do their job and they get paid for it. Doctors do their job and they get paid for it. Musicians do their job but they can't get paid for it.
Right.
And that's pretty fucked up, And we could also see that coming with the digital age. But we still do it because we're not hearing something out there, or at least that's why I do it. That's why I still make music. I just put out my 10th Spectre album in the 21 years.
Amazing.
And, the first few it took a while. It took a while for Spectre to catch on. But then I would say, like, towards the end of the 90s, I was actually selling a good amount of records for an independent label.
Right.
And we were touring Europe, Japan. To me, that was the biggest blessing for my music to get out there.
Yeah,
I just want people to hear it,
Right.
I'm not necessarily interested in becoming rich or famous off it, but I wouldn't complain if that happened.
Right.
But it just bugs me out to go to Japan, take a 14-hour flight to Japan, and then I'm walking around record stores in Tokyo and they have a WordSound section, or they have a Spectre record up on the wall.
Right.
To me, that means everything. That's because that means that my music is getting around the world. People are listening to it, and that's all I can ask for.
Yeah,
at the end of the day.
And you have a certain perspective that other artists might not have because you've seen from both sides of the fence too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, one scenario I know that we both probably weren't recognized or known for any of our accomplishments was the White Rapper Show.
Okay.
Because it was such a kind of a hilarious anomaly at the time that now people don't really reference that much. I mean, it was like kind of in this weird mid 2000s period of time, but it was pretty hilarious, and the two of us worked on the show behind the scenes, but we both had the same job, if I'm not mistaken, at least in the show's production. Now, I started in art department in pre-production. I built the stage with some other people as I was working as masquerading or moonlighting rather as a PA during that time. I also was doing
a ponytail, I remember.
Yeah, I had long hair
ponytail.
and I did, and like I think I had a big beard and shit too. So how were you brought into that show? It was through Ego Trip or?
Yeah, I was just looking for a gig, man, and those are my boys at Ego Trip, Sasha and Elliot. So I was just like, yo, put me on, son. And I kind of gotten late in the game, but it was good because the job that I was given was talent wrangler.
Right.
Which really meant hanging out with all the guest rappers who were on the show.
Exactly.
And being Search's personal chauffeur.
So you, at the end of the, for people that don't know, Search was the host of the show.
MC Search from Third Base.
Right.
Def Jam group.
Right.
He was the host of the show, and
who was living. I think he was based in Detroit at that time, or somewhere else.
Yeah, he was based in Detroit, but they put him up in New York for the show. They brought him and his family. So my job was basically to pick him up every morning, take him to set, hang out with him on set all day, hang out with any rappers who were guesting that day.
Right.
Get them whatever they needed.
Oh yeah, so the actual known entities, the known rappers that were guests, because there was a different challenge every day. There was a different guest rapper every day. So you would pick those guys up and bring them.
And that was a lot of fun because I knew a lot of these guys.
Right. Prince Paul was on it regularly.
Cool Keith.
Right.
My boy Cool Keith.
Or we shot in the strip club at Sue's Rendezvous.
Yeah, we shot at this really crazy strip club in the Bronx, and then Keith, I had to take Keith to his mom's house afterwards. After the strip club.
That's hilarious.
He said, yo, just drop me off at my mom's. And I love Cool Keith, man. He's he's a quirky guy, but super funny, super cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And, most rappers are like that, They're totally down to earth.
Right.
And, so... It was a good gig, It required a lot of smoking.
Yeah, which I remember smoking because you were because we were doing similar work, but yours was definitely the other side of it. Whereas I had to drive the contestants every day to their various physical and emotional challenges. The writers of the show, Ego Trip guys, had really run them through the ringer on a daily basis, which as an outsider was hilarious to watch, and especially because as the talent wrangler for the white rappers themselves, in the van I wasn't allowed to talk to them.
Right.
And but I knew, obviously we had like a call sheet that morning. We knew what was going down, like we knew where we were taking them. We knew that they were gonna go have lunch with Jules Santana or some shit like that, or they were gonna go to the rooftop party with Noriega, and but they had no idea, and I wasn't allowed to talk to them. And then, so you and I would converge in different vans on the set.
Man, I remember Nori, man. That was a nightmare.
Yeah? You had to pick, where'd you have to get him?
First of all, I had to go to somewhere in Jersey and pick him up at like this gated complex that he lived in,
Right.
I mean, it's this nice shishi suburban gated complex. And then, Nori... he can't go from point A to point B. We got to make like 10 different stops. So on the way back, I had to stop off at like Hot 97. He went on the radio for a minute. Then we had to stop, get a haircut.
Oh wow, he had a ride. So
yeah, and the whole time, it's not just him. It's him and his boys, and they're just chain smoking blunts in the car. And we're driving through like Midtown Manhattan, and the whole car is just filled with smoke. I'm trying to concentrate on driving, and I'm just smoked out. Right. I don't know where we're going, and I've had no food. So when they stopped at Hot 97, I was like pissed off. So I called the office, and I was like, "Yo, you told me to pick this guy up and bring him to the set. We've made like 3 different stops already. I haven't even had a chance to get some food. Can you send me some food?" So they had to have another production assistant come all the way from the Bronx to Manhattan and buy me food and stuff like this.
Yeah, because we were shooting in the Bronx. Yeah, in a warehouse in the South Bronx.
We were shooting in stone's throw from Bronx River Projects.
Right.
And whole area is just toe up. It's gritty. It's grimy. And then we have this little compound there where these like 4 or 5 white rappers are just. It was bizarre. It was surreal.
It was.
I love experiences like that.
Yeah.
And then then Search was he was like high maintenance too.
Yeah, he's the host too.
Always had to get him special stuff, and he could not. His wife was staying with him and his kids, so he had to be very careful about smoking weed in front of them.
Right.
So I always had to go and procure his weed in Harlem or someplace, and then we park somewhere so he could smoke, and then that's the night that we ended up. What happened that night? We were lift home, or
I think you gave the 3 of us a lift, and I might have got out where Search was getting out and just got on the train because I was living way out in Bushwick at the time. So far away from where the shoot was. I mean, it was like an hour and a half subway ride or something like that.
How did you get to?
Well, oftentimes I drove when I was doing art department. I would take the truck all the way to Bushwick, and then so I was living on.
Oh, so you could keep the truck
overnight?
Yeah. Me too. I could keep the rental overnight.
Yeah, so we were able to kind of get to and from work a little bit. But I do remember one of those nights after work. Because you would take Search back to the I guess they put him in a hotel or something, and because I remember I got him to sign a cover of Brooklyn Queens 12-inch because we were smoking a bowl in the van, the 3 of us just kicking back after work after a long day's work at the White Rapper show. And it was just like a hilarious memory because I've never encountered Search before or after that. But we were, working together first. It was like a summer job,
right. Yeah, funny enough, out of all the people that I interviewed for the New Beats, Search was like the biggest a-hole.
Really?
Yeah, and since that time, I always kind of did not like him after that.
Right.
But then I get this job where my job is to be his personal assistant and to drive him around. Can you imagine that?
Right.
But he didn't even remember that I had interviewed him for the New Beats, and we just hit it off. He was cool.
He seemed cool.
Yeah, and it's just kind of funny how things work out like that. Because years earlier I thought he was such an ass, but then when I got to know him and working with him,
right.
He was a totally cool guy.
Do you remember Bushwick Bill was on the show too? Did you have to pick him up?
Oh yeah.
That was a treat to meet him too. I remember I bummed a cigarette off of him. We smoked Newports at the back of the set. But yeah, it was just such a trip, and and the cast were so bizarre, like how they just all their personalities. They were such fish out of water. Even Persia, who was the local homegrown talent, the woman rap female. I don't remember them. She was so you might remember her.
More time with them than I did.
I was with the.
I was spending all my time with the talent,
right?
And you were spending all your time with the contestants.
Yeah, the opposite of the talent. But she was from Far Rockaway, Queens, and I had to drive her when she got kicked off the show. I had to drive her all the way to Far Rockaway from the Bronx, as she was crying on the phone to her mom about how she got kicked off the show.
And that show ran for 2 seasons, right?
It did, yeah, but the next one was in L.A., and it was all-female cast.
Okay.
So what we had the great, the original thing. So, but that, that was a great memory, but it was definitely not your only time on TV, too. And I just watched this shit, but I'm sure you've done other stuff, too. But your episode on No Reservations, that's something I wanted to talk about too, just your experience, if you want to talk about that. Yeah. So with Anthony Bourdain, you guys went to Sri Lanka together, right?
Yeah, that kind of gets into where I'm at these days, which is, I'm still into music and everything, but cooking is more of my bread and butter these days.
Cool.
So basically, it started out. I've always liked to cook. It's always been kind of like a hobby.
So even back when you were doing music stuff,
I love to eat. So if you live alone, you better
Right.
know how to cook.
Right.
You know, so I was always into cooking and into learning how to cook other stuff.
What about your parents? Did they cook a lot when you were a kid?
Yeah, my mom cooked all the time, and you know, my family's from Sri Lanka, so she would always make Sri Lankan food a couple times a week, and you miss that food when you leave home.
Sure.
When you live on your own.
Right.
You know, so one of my wishes was to learn to make all the food that I had grown up eating, Sri Lankan food, because it's so good. No one really knows about it because, you know, Sri Lanka is such a small place, and you don't have a lot of Sri Lankan restaurants in America.
No. Are there some in New York?
New York is actually one of the bigger places where there are Sri Lankans, because Staten Island, you have a Sri Lankan community. There's even a neighborhood called Little Sri Lanka.
In Staten Island?
In Staten Island, and you have like 4 or 5 really good Sri Lankan restaurants.
I got to go out there and check that.
But this was like 2005, maybe. If was that when the White Rapper show was?
Yeah, it was 2006.
2006, yeah. So you know, I was doing the White Rapper show because I needed a gig.
Right.
I needed work. I needed money, and I did that. And then I'm like, man, I'm gonna have to get a full-time job. This is not cutting it. So instead of doing that, I said, you know what? I've wanted to do this Sri Lankan cookbook all my life, you know, and really learn how to make the food that I grew up with. I think now's the time to do it because I got nothing going on here and I have no prospects. So, you know, why not just rent out my place and just leave the country for a year and work on a cookbook and just do something completely different. It's still exercising my creativity, but it'll get me out of the country, it'll get me working on something different, and it'll be a whole fresh perspective. So that's exactly what I did. My mom had just bought a place in Sri Lanka, a condo. So I had a place to live rent-free, and meanwhile I rented out my place in Baltimore.
Right.
You know, I have a whole house in Baltimore, so I rented that out. And with that kind of income, you can live like a king in Sri Lanka.
Really? Okay.
You know, because it's so cheap to live there and when you're not paying rent. So I went to Sri Lanka, where my whole extended family lives, and I started just immersing myself in the food scene there. Like I started going to markets. I started learning how to buy produce. I started learning about spices, like what does this spice do? How does this, you know, basically learning about the cuisine from the ground up.
Ah, amazing.
And it was such an amazing.
And you just went in cold, like I'm gonna try this and see what happens.
Try this.
Dope.
I didn't have a book deal or anything.
Amazing. Yeah. Cool.
But you know, at least I'm able to support myself while I'm there, and I'm doing a project that I'm really into, and I got recipes from relatives, from friends. I ate out at restaurants. I basically became an expert in Sri Lankan food. And then I took this information that I had gotten over this year, and it was also a great year because, you know, I was able to travel to different places in Asia during that year.
Cool.
I had a base in Sri Lanka. Went to Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia.
Wow.
And explored their food scenes too. And it was a great year. So when I came back, I had the makings of a cookbook. And I had even brought a friend of mine who's a photographer, a professional photographer. Her name's Susan now. I brought her to Sri Lanka to do all the photography for the book.
Cool.
And I had amazing pictures. I had recipes. And then I come back to the U.S. in like end of 2006, and I've already done the new beats. I've had a book out. How tough can it be to publish another book?
Right.
So I got an agent, and
really, is this that? I mean, were you able to parlay your success with the new beats, which is totally different style of book?
Different style, but yeah, just having a track record as an author, it's much easier to get an agent.
Sure.
So I got an agent. He was psyched about this book, but he said it's going to be tough to sell a cookbook if you're not a celebrity chef.
Okay.
So he was unable to actually sell the cookbook. Like after a year, he was unable to do it. But I, on my own, approached this small company. Well, first of all, I self-published the book.
Cool. Okay.
On Blurb, which is like a self-published.
Right. Yeah.
Because I wanted to see what the whole thing was going to look like with the pictures and everything. So with this self-publishing site, you can lay it out and everything, and they'll print out one copy, color copy, and send it to you. Only thing is, it costs $40 to print out one copy. So if I was, if you're going to sell a book for that much, you're not going to make much profit off it.
No.
You can't, charge much more than that.
No.
So, but anyway, I had these sample copies, and at that time, I used to watch No Reservations with Anthony Bourdain on the Travel Channel. I liked the show because I travel a lot too.
Yeah.
And I've been to a lot of the same places, and it was that was like one of the first travel shows, right? Like, and food shows. So I liked this show, and my man Bill Adler.
Yes.
Who's big in the hip hop.
Yeah. Legend.
He's a legend. He was the first publicist for Def Jam. I found out that Bill Adler's wife was Sarah Moulton, who's like one of the first Food Network chefs.
Right.
Now she's got a show on PBS. And not only that, but Sarah Moulton had gone to cooking school with Anthony Bourdain. I was just mentioning that I liked this show, No Reservations, and I was wondering if she knew Anthony Bourdain, and she said, yeah, I do. So I said, can you give me his email? Because I just came back from Sri Lanka. I have this cookbook. And so she gave me his email, and I just sent him a cold note, just like, I'm a big fan of the show. I just came back from a year in Sri Lanka working on a cookbook. If you ever do a show there, I'd be happy to show you around. That's all I said.
Cool.
Then I sent him a copy, one of the Blurb copies. And then a couple months later, one of his producers called me up, and he said, we got your email and everything, and we're going to do a show in Sri Lanka. Would you like to come? And I was like, man, sign me up immediately.
Yeah.
And not only did I get a chance to go, but I basically produced the whole show, because I decided where we're going to eat. I decided what foods we're going to cover. I decided who's going to be on the show. I decided what segments. I put together the whole show.
They gave you that kind of freedom, like, hey, where do you want to go?
They know nothing about it.
Right.
They had never been there. They don't know anyone there.
Right.
That's another good thing about the show. They usually get a fixer who's an insider.
Sure.
And that guy hooks them up with everything. And obviously after having lived there for a year, I now know a lot of people there.
Yeah.
And through my family, it's a small place.
Yeah.
Through my family, I could get to anyone in Sri Lanka.
Right.
So we do 2 months of pre-production on this show, and it's back and forth. I'm dealing with the producer, and then I do a tour of Europe with Sensational. We go away for 2 weeks, and then like right after that, I flew to Sri Lanka with Bourdain and crew, and we shot the show for 6 days. Every day, 3 or 4 locations.
Wow.
It's busy. But they're very professional. They're used to doing it. They have 2 shooters, a producer, and a director, and Bourdain. So it's a crew of 5 and myself. So we rented a van. 3 or 4 locations every day. Very busy schedule.
Right.
The way it works is like they would. The crew would come early, shoot the preparation of the food. Then when the food's ready, they would call Bourdain, go send the van to pick him up. He shows up, does his thing. It's a little bit, I thought that he would hang out more with the crew, but he didn't really do that. He was also sick coming into the trip.
Yeah, it seemed like that, like the beginning of the episode.
Which
he was
kind of funny because you can see it on his face
right.
in the episode. He had a bad dirty water hot dog in New York the day before we left.
Oh my God.
So he had like some food poisoning, and he was in a real bad mood on the whole trip. I remember the flight,
Yeah, what's the flight like? Where do you fly from New York or London?
Went JFK to London, then London to Abu Dhabi.
Wow.
Abu Dhabi to Sri Lanka. The whole trip takes about 23 hours.
Yeah.
And then we get to Sri Lanka. It's just hot as a mother.
What time of year was it?
It was in December.
Wow.
But any time of year there, it's like 80 degrees and muggy.
Right.
And, also this is in the last stage of the Civil War that was going on there.
Wow.
So Colombo is like a fortified city. There's checkpoints every few hundred yards. There's armed troops on the streets with AKs. So they were all a little freaked out about that. Like checkpoints, you got to give the passport. They searched your. So the crew was a little freaked out. Bourdain was a little freaked out about all this. to add to his food poisoning.
Right.
And then, he was a little. At first, he was a little standoffish.
Right.
Obviously we got to know each other well on the trip, but
right. I'm gonna close this window real quick.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, man.
So we're in Sri Lanka, in December 2008. I think it's very hot. It's muggy. There's all kinds of military on the streets, on checkpoints, Kalashnikovs everywhere. Bourdain has got food poisoning, and we're eating at 3 or 4 spots a day. And it's like heavy stuff like curries.
Yeah, it looked like it.
And every place that I go to, I take the chef aside and said, they like it really hot. Put a lot of chili into it.
Right.
They eat like Sri Lankans. So that probably compounded his diarrhea, and so he was not loving life on that trip. Wow. But it was a fun trip, and we covered a lot of ground. And then for the last meal, I took him. There's this lady named Leela who's been my aunt's cook for like 45 years, and she's about this tall. She's about 3 feet tall. This little lady speaks no English, and she had just retired from my aunt's, and she lives in a little village like 3 hours north of Colombo, like in the middle of the boondocks. So I took Bourdain and crew there for lunch, and
on a train too, right?
Yeah, we drove up there. We took a train to Kandy. That was a different.
Oh, okay.
But we drove like 3 hours to this village outside of Chilau, and Leela and her sisters cooked a huge meal for us. And their kitchen is basically outside. It's like they built like little fires outside and cooked in clay pots. Right. This is a full-on Sri Lankan traditional village meal, and he loved that.
Cool.
He loved it. There was like 10 different dishes. And then I asked him, can you write a blurb for my book, for the back cover? And he was very nice. He wrote a blurb for it. And then after the show aired, I was still trying to get a deal for my book, because remember I had self-published it. So I came across this company called Hippocrene Books, which is based in New York. Okay. And they do all types of ethnic cookbooks and foreign language books. So I approached them about publishing Rice and Curry, which is the title of my cookbook. And they were, after it had gotten ordained by Bourdain and all this, so they were well on board. So the book came out in 2011, end of 2011, and it was actually it became a New York Times notable cookbook of the year.
Really?
Yeah, it was on. Nice. Every year they publish a list of like 10 to 15 books that you should check out, and Rice and Curry, Sri Lankan Home Cooking, the Hippocrene Books version was on there. And basically, when that book came out, that started the next chapter of my career, which is food, and that's where I'm at now.
Incredible. Yeah, it's super cool, man. Yeah, I mean, I love cooking, and I do quite a bit, but curry is something I've always been a little intimidated about, like, jumping into. So, but I want to peep that book out.
You should definitely peep my book, because unlike a lot of books on the market, sometimes you buy a book and you cook a recipe and it never turns out like that. I have personally tested all the recipes in my book, like, a lot. So, that's the work in doing a cookbook, making sure that the recipe that you publish is going to turn out the same every time.
Right.
So, I would definitely, encourage you to try it, because it's not that difficult. It's just people are kind of intimidated by the ingredients, but really once you demystify that, it's pretty simple and straightforward.
Nice. And this next thing, how far along are you with that? And then
my next book is going to be called Gen Next with an N, and it's basically a memoir of the last 25 years of my life in music, in film, in cooking, in traveling. And I just, this has been a project I've been working on for the last 8 years, since 2008. So it's finally good to just get it off my desk now. And I'm just in the process of sending it to an agent.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Nice.
So the book is, let's just say that the first draft is completed. It's about 300 pages long.
So how many words is that?
Oh, man.
Do you even think in those terms?
Yeah. I mean, because, on the computer, it tells you how many words, but I was more concerned about
pages.
Yeah, right. It's about 300 pages, double spaced.
That's great.
Each chapter is, there's 9 chapters. Each chapter is roughly 30 pages. The chapter and each chapter takes place in a different country.
Dope.
Yeah.
Cool.
So like there's a ton of stuff we haven't even talked about, like my time in Iraq, when I worked in Iraq.
Wow.
That's the opening chapter of the book.
Wow. Okay.
And then it goes through, and the biggest chapter in the book is Crooklyn, and it's about the WordSound era and my time in New York. And then there's even a chapter on Baltimore.
Nice.
Where I currently reside.
Right.
That's my base. But
how long were you in Iraq for?
I was in Iraq for 6 weeks.
Cool.
In the middle of the worst time, like end of 2004.
Wow.
Yeah, when it was very tense and hectic there, and I was doing video editing there. I was editing. That's another thing we haven't even talked about. We never talked about Crooked or my video, my film stuff. But I was making TV commercials there to promote the elections, and it was a very tense time to be there. And we were living outside the green zone, right next to the Australian embassy, and they were truck bombed, and it totally kind of just blew our whole house to smithereens.
Wow.
Luckily, no one was inside at the time. So
Jeez.
That's a whole nother adventure.
Right. Yeah, no, I know. I bet.
So, I just feel like, the reason I did this book is, they say the unexamined life is not worth living, and it's like, at this point in my life, I'm 48. I've done a ton of stuff, but I feel like I have really nothing to show for it besides the experiences themselves, the experience of, because to me, traveling is like something that you can't really, it's such an abstract experience, but it changes you in so many ways at the same time.
Absolutely.
Too, and that's why the book is structured like that. Each chapter is set in a different country, because to me, travel has really enriched my life and made me the person I am. And I wouldn't want to live if I couldn't travel and see the world and experience different people and different places, because that's what it's all about to me.
Definitely.
The journey, the adventure. And I'm just kind of reflecting back on the last 25 years of everything that I've done. And, even though I might not have much to show it materially, I feel like a very rich man. I feel like I've had an incredibly blessed life up to now. And
you got some incredible stories, man, I tell you.
I'm happy. And it's great to have venues like this to talk about stuff like that.
Yeah, hell yeah.
The long form, as a journalist, I prefer the long form.
Right.
I like writing in-depth pieces, because everything is just so superficial in our society. Everything is so, now, especially now more than ever in the digital age, Twitter, 140 characters. But there's something to be said for the long form, whether it's writing, whether it's a podcast like this, where you can really get into someone's mind and someone's experiences. So I've had a ton of people who I've been inspired with in my life, and they've really caused me to live the life that I have. And I hope, just in my experiences and what I've done, I hope I can inspire other people, because that's what it's all about, really. We're not put here to be, put into this 9-to-5 lifestyle where we're suffocated, where our creativity is suffocated, where our dreams are not meant to be relevant. As human beings, we each have to kind of dig into ourselves, find out what we really want to do, what our passion is, and just do it. Don't worry about the money or the educational background or anything. Money has never stopped me from doing anything I've wanted to do in life, including starting a label. And, maybe it's that naivete that made me do it, but, you learn by doing stuff. You don't learn by school. You learn by jumping completely 100% into something and doing it. And I've been blessed with the best education. I've gone to private school. I went to Harvard. I went to Columbia. But I have learned more than anything from other people and from traveling. And that's what I encourage people to do. Because when you travel, you really free your mind. And, as George Clinton says, free your mind and your ass will follow. So let's leave it at that.
Yeah. Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it, bro.
Thank you.
Right. Definitely. Yes. All right. Well, that was my talk with Skiz, Fernando, Fernando Jr. I'm still in my backyard of my parents' house, my childhood home. You can hear the, because it's completely dark. I'm standing in darkness, looking back at the kitchen. I got to go up, I checked on the duck. I'm almost done with my duck. I'm roasting some carrots. Made a traditional Hungarian cucumber, white vinegar sort of salad. Amongst, see what else we got. We got my cranberry sauce, my signature red cabbage with coriander. So yeah, getting hungry. Yeah. I got to keep that energy up. CJ, my editor, told me I need to have a higher energy when I come do my outros. So, given the production style of this, I often have to record the intros and outros at times, completely different from when I record the actual conversations themselves. So coming into it, I'm hyped up. I'm ready to finish my meal, making it at least, feed my loved ones. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning into the House List. You can find us on iTunes. Just search the House List Podcast. Please subscribe. I'd love to see more people engaging with it, especially if you like these conversations. I got many more to come. You can also find it on SoundCloud.com as well, and pretty soon have it up on Audio Mac and Stitcher as well. There's some other formats, YouTube, when I can. Because I got to do all that on my own, and ain't nobody paying me, you know what I'm saying? So this is a labor of love, just like the people I talk to on these things. It's really a lot of people that love what they do, are passionate about what they do, particularly in music. So yeah, the opening theme was written and produced and performed by Dame Funk and Keith Ide. I want to send them a strong shout out, especially here on Thanksgiving. I work a lot with Dame Funk. It's an incredible performer, producer, songwriter, and DJ. If you ever have the chance to check him out live or any of his recordings, if you may be unfamiliar with him, I highly recommend looking him up, DAM-FUNK. What else? Well, I just want to thank you guys too as I continue doing this. Let's get this. Let's wrap this year up. I think it's been long enough for all of us. And get this next year figured out one way or another, Jesus. Okay, thanks again for listening. I want to send one more shout out to Fernando Jr. for being a part of the House List, and I'll see you guys next week. All right, travel safe. I love you all. Grateful for you guys. Love one another. All right, peace, y'all. I'm out of here.